This is Grandma here reading The Door in the Wall, and we are on chapter 9. I'm only going to read half the chapter. It's a very long chapter. To review, the Welsh are attacking Sir Peter's castle, and the villagers have all come inside the castle walls. And to remind you, this is kind of what it looks like. So there's a lot of room for villagers in what they call the bailey, which is all this green area, this flat area. And the Welsh used the fog. We don't know why the Welsh attacked him, but apparently this has been something that's been going on for a long time. And the Welsh it's another country. Today it's a part of England, but back then it was considered a separate country. The fog held for days. The Welsh could not get beyond the outer wall of the castle, and the English inside could not tell what strength the enemy possessed. They might be encamped on the surrounding hills, or they might be only a small company. Several of the guards on the wall had been injured, and sometimes the yeoman could tell that an arrow had struck home in the enemy camp. Most of the time, there was only watchful waiting on both sides. The Welsh had a machine for catapulting stones, most of which thudded harmlessly into the courtyard. Sometimes one struck the inner wall, but most of them fell short, dropping into the moat. And again, there are several walls. There's the outer wall of the castle, which is here, and then this ring here is the moat that has water in it. But there are inner walls, like here's another wall here, and this is the keep, where they keep all of the people stay protected in a war, and they take all their valuables. Okay, continuing. Inside the keep, women occupied themselves with spinning, weaving, and embroidery. It helped the time to pass more quickly. The children played with toy soldiers and blocks with hobby horses and with dolls. Sometimes Robin told them tales or sang songs, but he spent most of the time in the chamber where he slept, working on the Saxon harp. William Wise had set up a workshop for him and had finished the tool of hardened iron. There was a small lathe for turning the keys and a vise, all arranged so that Robin could sit on a stool to reach them. The tool for making the holes was sharp, so that part was not difficult. Just as John Go-in-the-Wind had said, it was harder to turn the keys on the lathe so they would fit exactly. They were either too large and would not go in, or when they had been turned smaller, they were too small and would not hold the strings in tune. But Robin was learning patience. He'd found out that the harder it was to do something, the more comfortable he felt after he had done it. Sir Peter had stood all of one night on the bastion, directing and encouraging the men. And this would be at a high point on one of the walls. They had managed to drive off a raiding party that was trying to scale the wall. Now he was in bed with a chill, and Lady Constance waited upon him. The food in the larder dwindled, and there were many people to be fed, because all the villagers are there too. Besides the garrison and the household, there were the yeomen from the town, and those who had sought refuge when the Portuguese was raised. Usually there was a good supply of salt fish kept in barrels, but fish had not been plentiful the past summer, so now the supply was meager. There was mutton, to be sure, but it was all on 4 legs and scattered over the downs beyond the castle and town. In other words, sheep, and they're still living. And they're not inside the wall. The winter kill had not taken place because they waited for freezing weather. There was flour to last for a short time, but the yearly portion from the peasants' holdings was to have been brought to the castle the following week. Besides, there had been a small crop of grain because of the summer's drought. Then the water began to fail. As Robin came into the hall at supper time, he passed the table where the retainers sat. Dennis leaned to whisper in the ear of Adam the yeoman, "There is scarce a foot of water in the wall." "Well," he whispered, "just now, As I drew it to fill the ewer, the cook told me. How came this? Asked Adam. 'Tis known that this is a good well. Oh, tell not her ladyship, and send word around that water must be used sparingly, or 'twill not last the week out, even for drinking. He thought for a moment, then said, Someone must go for help, or we shall be forced to surrender the castle. It might be that Sir Hugh Fitzhugh would come to our aid, for he too is in danger from the Welsh if they break our defense. But whom shall we spare? All are needed at their posts. Let me go, said Robin. I can go out the small door at the north, early in the morning. No one will suspect me. They'll think me a poor shepherd. I shall borrow a smock from William the Farrier's son, and if I am seen, I shall appear stupid. We shall keep it a secret, for if Sir Peter were to find out my plan, he would forbid me to go, and not knowing how strong I really am. But thou art only a lad, Adam objected, and art cumbered with crutches as well. How wilt thou cross the river? The bridge is well guarded at both ends. It shall go well, never fear, Robin assured them confidently. I have it all in my head how it will be done. I shall find John Go in the Wind at his mother's cottage in Trippeath village. John shall set forth from there for Sir Hugh and his men. Now let us plan. First, I want you, Dennis, to bring me that smock and some rags to wrap my legs. Then, see you, find me a hood that is worn and faded. Besides, I shall need long leather thongs to tie the crutches on my back, for I shall swim in the river. Fear not you the soldiers? Queried Dennis anxiously. Will you not fall down the steep bank? 'Tis a far distance to the bottom of the ravine, and he stopped suddenly because one of the maids appeared. See to it, said Robin with a quick nod. That evening there was no gathering about the fire. Everyone was restless. The hounds were still uneasy, walking about, cocking their ears at the least sound. Lady Constance took one of her women to examine the stores. Robin was afraid she would discover how low the water was in the well. Instead, she seemed confident that they were sufficient. How fortunate we are that there is plenty of water, she said. Sir Peter says our well has never failed. Dennis looked at Robin, knowing that he shared the secret. Dennis, knowing Robin's plan, was in a fidget to be through with his duties and find William the Farrier's son and borrow his clothes. He would probably be with his father at the forge, repairing pikes and lances and heating oil for pouring onto the enemy in case they should pierce the outer castle wall. Robin put on his warmest undertunic and carefully put away the little harp and all the parts and tools so that they would be safe. He looked at it regretfully, hating to leave it. Then when all was ready except changing his clothes, he sought out Brother Luke, for he knew that the friar would give him help and encouragement. Dressed in the patched and ragged smock, his legs wound about with bits of rag to hold the ill-fitting hosen, Robin tried to sleep away the early part of the night, but excitement kept him awake. That sometimes happens to me when I am getting ready to go on a trip. And it wouldn't be a dangerous trip. Even when he dozed, he was aware of what he was about to do. He counted over the things he must remember. He must go softly with the crutches. He must remember the leather thongs. As Brother Luke had told him, he mustn't forget oil for the rusty lock of the door in the wall. He must keep Doth, the hound, quiet. Just before dawn, Brother Luke touched him. Come, my son, he whispered. We shall say the office before it is time to set forth on thy mission. Remember, that's prayers. When the prayers were finished, Robin pulled on the faded hood, tucked the leather thong inside it, and followed the friar. Doth rose from the sleep to follow after, but Robin touched his head and whispered a command for him to stop. Doth, stay you here, he said. wishing very much that the dog could go with him. They went down a half flight of steps and across the hall of the keep to the winding stair, making their way quietly among the sleeping servants. They went very slowly, for Robin's crutches tapped an alarm when he made haste, and the least step would have sent him clattering down. There was still fog when they came into the open, but it had begun to drift, and there was a gray dawn just beginning to break. "Who goes there?" demanded the sentry at the door, but seeing Robin and the friar, he allowed them to pass, thinking they were bent on some holy errand. Robin shuddered. "Art fearful, my son?" asked the friar. "Not truly," answered Robin, "though 'tis weird in the fog." "Aye, 'tis an eerie feeling to be out in the cheerless dawn, not knowing at what moment an enemy may appear out of the fog," agreed Brother Luke. And at that moment a face did appear, but it was only one of the guards, who thought the two were on their way to the chapel. They reached the sally port in the north wall without meeting anyone else. Brother Luke dripped oil into the lock before trying to open the door. Robin listened. "Hark," he whispered. "I hear the Welsh sentry outside. We can count the paces and can tell how far away he is. 1, 2, 3, 4. They counted 40 paces. Now." Slowly the door opened and Robin slipped outside. "Benedictite," whispered the friar in blessing, and closed the door. Quickly, Robin moved away from the door and the wall. In a moment, he was at the edge of the deep ravine. He could hear the river far below, but could not see it for the fog. Now again, looking at this picture, you can see right here that even once you get over the wall, you've got a deep incline to a moat. And in Robin's case, it's a river. But most of the castles are like that. The one that we looked at earlier, for instance, Carnarvon Castle, you can see other pictures of castles where there's water and you have to get down this steep grassy section, and I imagine all this was added recently, steep grassy section to get down to the water. Okay. Now became the treacherous descent. Carefully, Robin tested each clod of earth, each bit of stone before trusting his weight to the crutches, praying the while that the fog would hold. Sometimes he slid on his haunches, sometimes seedling trees held him till he was able to find sure footing. If I should start a stone rolling, he thought, the whole Welsh army will be upon my neck. It seemed hours to Robin that he was sliding, groping, laboring down the treacherous cliff, but it was only a few moments, for the light of morning had scarcely changed when he reached the bottom and found himself at the edge of the river. He stopped only long enough to fasten the crutches onto his back with a leather thong and to wind his hood into a kind of hat that perched on top of his head. Then he plunged into the icy water, not allowing himself to consider whether he had the courage to do it. Now remember, this is November. When first the water closed over him, Robin thought he could not bear it. The crutches were awkward, his chest felt tightly squeezed, and as if sharp knives pierced him. He seemed unable to breathe, and his head felt ready to burst, but he struck out fiercely, and after a few strokes began to breathe more easily. Warmth crept through his body, and a feeling of power, as if nothing could be too difficult for him. He swam strongly against the swift current toward the path he'd seen from the top of the tower. What if the enemy should be camped at the other side? Suppose they wouldn't believe he was the poor shepherd he pretended to be. Suppose he found it impossible to get up the bank on the other side. Anyone could not do it, he said to himself stubbornly, and thrashed his arms more fiercely. At last he felt the stones of shallower water under his feet. The bank appeared mistily green, and he was able to hold himself steady with one hand while he untied the crutches and set them under his armpits. The bank was not very steep after all, and in a moment he was at the top, ready to go on. His teeth chattered in the rising wind. His feet felt as if they had been frozen. His hands were so numb with cold that he could hardly hold the crutches to steady them as he walked. He paused long enough to let down the hood into its proper shape. The warm wool felt good, although it was wet along the edges. Then he looked for the signs of the path. It had shown so clearly from the top of the tower. He moved along the bank a few paces where generations of peasants had worn a highway and came to the path. The fog was lifting somewhat with the wind, and Robin looked back once, caught sight of the castle he had left behind. He even caught the glimpse of the sentry along the path, just as he had so lately escaped by that door in the wall. After passing, which, isn't that the name of the book, The Door in the Wall? So there actually is a door in the wall that he used. After passing through a patch of brush and willows, Robin came out into the field. He still could not see very far ahead, but the path was straight before him. So he began to swing along as fast as he could, his crutches making great sweeping circles, his feet covering the ground in tremendous strides. There seemed to be no one about, so he made haste without regard to noise, and gradually the numbness in his feet and hands began to ease. Across the field he went, swing, step, swing, step, swing, step. The fog wavered and lifted, swirled about in sudden drafts, floated across the path in thin layers, showed a patch of blue sky in an instant, and glimpses of trees ahead. Suddenly, a voice rang out. "Who goes there?" Robin stopped. "'Tis but I, Robin," he answered in a meek voice, and the chill that ran down his spine was not all from dampness of his clothing. "Robin who?" the voice went on. "Robin Crookshank, some call me," answered Robin. The fog parted, showing the fierce and scowling head of a man. We're going to stop there. So who do you think the man is? Do you think it's a Welshman? Do you think it's a friend of Robin's? Do you think it's a spy? Do you think it's Robin's father? Who do you think it is? Well, we'll find out the next time I start reading. Bye-bye.